So, anybody hear me? Yes? Okay, perfect. So, welcome everyone to this presentation today called In the Time of Cholera, History of the Victorian Pandemic. Now, some of the publicity material actually, I think early on had the Victorian epidemic. As some of you may know, there's a difference between pandemic and epidemic. Pandemic being that it's an epidemic that's spreading to many continents. Epidemic is more localized, so there's a difference. As you were told, I am from the Museum of Healthcare here in Kingston. So does anybody here know about the museum? Yes, oh good, very good. Good number actually. So the museum here is one of the only museum of its kind in Canada. We talk not only about medicine, but also about dentistry, nursing, chiropractic, so every field of healthcare that there is, and we're centering on the Canadian history of healthcare. So if ever you haven't had the chance to visit us, do take the time. It's right around KGH. For those of you who don't know, we'll be very pleased to have you around. So let's begin with our subject today. Now, so there's many diseases, of course, that come to mind when we think of the Victorian era, right? Tuberculosis, yellow fever, smallpox, typhus, but probably one that is the most famous is cholera. Few diseases inspired as much terror and confusion as cholera in its time, and led to so many scientific and even political revolution in those days. So let's look a little bit at what is exactly cholera. Now, I want to tell you, I am not a physician, so what I'm telling you is not medical advice. If at the end of the presentation you think you're suffering from cholera, don't ask me, I won't be able to help you. Although there's Dr. Gorwill, our board chair right here, that might be able to help you. Who knows? But anyway, if ever you're feeling uneasy, please go to the hospital. So what is exactly cholera? So cholera is an infection of the small intestine by strain of the bacterium called Vibrio cholerae. Symptoms range from none. Some people get cholera and have no symptoms. Some get mild symptoms, and some get severe symptoms, obviously. So the classic symptom is large amounts of watery diarrhea that lasts a few days. Vomiting, muscle cramps can also occur, and diarrhea is so severe that it can lead within a couple of hours to severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance, which can cause death. So this may result in sunken eyes, cold skin, decreased skin elasticity, and wrinkling at the hands and feet. So the dehydration can turn the skin bluish, and this is a very telling sign of cholera that you see a lot in the description of those times. So people who have a cadaveric countenance to them. So symptoms can start from 2 hours to 5 days after exposure. It's going to be quite quick. You can suffer the effects quite quickly. So cholera is caused by a number of types of Vibrio cholerae bacteria. Some produce more severe disease than others, and actually the one I'm going to talk to you about today, so the one that took many lives during the 19th century, is actually a more severe strain than the one that's common today. So it's spread mostly by water and food that has been contaminated with human feces, and that contains the bacteria. So insufficiently cooked seafood is a common source right now, and mostly in third world countries, but also sometimes in Western countries. Hey.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Sorry.
Is it better now?
No, but okay. The hearing device systems were down, and I'm sorry. I did that. I apologize. Try again.
Hello? Is it better? Yes? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sorry.
So,
There'll be one more glitch like that in a minute, but sorry,
Okay.
I apologize.
thanks for warning us. So, where was I? Okay, now, all right. So, as I was saying, there are some Western countries that are also have cases of cholera once in a while. The United States sometimes has cases of cholera, although they are fairly well controlled. So, risk factors for the disease include poor sanitation, not enough clean drinking water, and poverty. And also, if you're watching news recently, concerning climate change, they are concerned that rising sea levels will actually increase the rates of the disease. So it might become worse in some areas, such as Bangladesh, which has problems with rising sea levels. Now, where does the disease come from? So it's hard to establish an origin, but it's believed that cholera was native to India, and it was first documented in Bengal around 1816. And it was also around this time that the British fought the Anglo-Maratha War, where thousands of British soldiers were infected by cholera. So this was the first contact between the West and the disease over there. So, of course, cholera is very much associated with war. Like many other diseases, when you have war, you have many men that are sharing close quarters, not necessarily very good hygiene, of course. They're tired, and of course, it's a very good place for diseases to spread. So, what happens is that we believe that actually some of the soldiers that were infected during the Anglo-Maratha War helped spread the disease around India, and possibly later on when they came back to their own country, to England and to Europe itself. Now, the first pandemic lasted until 1826, and it spread as far as China, and all of the Southeast Asia, even Indonesia and Japan, which is very interesting because Japan at the time was closed, completely closed, except for one outpost that received Dutch traders. But the rest of the country was completely closed to the outside, and the disease still managed to come into Japan and made many victims around this time. Now, so it's interesting to note that throughout its history, and this is the map of the first epidemic. So as you can see, it spread a little bit around the Middle East, around Eastern Europe. It reached Russia and Germany. But it's interesting that war has such a strong connection. And you'll see, again, through all of the big pandemics, it's always either during or after a big conflict. And so the second pandemic is probably the one that's the most well known to us. It started in 1829, and it went through the commercial routes through Afghanistan, Persia, and then to Russia. And from Russia, it entered through Prussia and Germany, and that's how we believe that it entered France and England afterwards. So it made, only in France, for example, it made 100,000 casualties in 1 year. And this disease came to be known as King Cholera, because it was viewed as the king of all diseases. And so the disease entered England in 1832 at a time of mass immigration. So many people were coming to North America, of course, from the British Isles, as you may know. And this was a major vector of of course, of infection and of contamination in North America. So, but what's interesting is that the authorities actually did not believe that cholera would cross the ocean. They thought at the time that cholera was caused by what's called miasma. I don't know if you ever heard the term, but of course the germ theory, the idea that you could be infected by bacteria or viruses was completely unknown. So people had other theories to try and explain how these diseases were spread. And so they believed that it was due to a cloud of decomposing organic matter. So a poisonous cloud that was around the cities mostly and poisoning people with cholera. So they thought that, of course, the cloud cannot cross the ocean, right? It will just dissipate itself over the Atlantic and everything will be fine here in Canada. It didn't turn quite that way, fortunately for them. Of course, you had, as I was saying, a massive wave of immigration. The infamous, of course, coffin ships coming from Ireland, from the British Isle, coming and bringing cholera with them. So at the start of the epidemic, if I can just get there. Okay. So at the start of the epidemic, Canada and Quebec had already a station to maintain quarantine for newly arriving ships in Gosille in Quebec, around Quebec City. But the quarantine lasted only 3 days, which was unfortunately insufficient to notice if indeed cholera was present or not inside those ships. So on June 8, 1832, we have rumors spreading that a ship containing cholera victims made a stop at Gosille. So a rumor that was dismissed at the time by the authorities. Unfortunately, they were wrong, obviously, and more than 2,000 people would die in Quebec City alone around that time, which is, for the numbers of the day, incredibly high. So here we are in Quebec City, and this is a very famous painting here, made in 1832 by a painter named Joseph Legay, and it actually documents quite well the effects of cholera on the city's landscape. So we're here around Market Square in Quebec City. So who has visited Quebec City here? Great. So anybody recognize where this could be? Yeah? Yes?
It's Lower Town.
Lower Town?
That church commemorates the victory over the British.
Oh yeah, okay. No, actually so the one you're referring to is the one in Petit Champlain. This one is actually the Notre Dame Basilica. So it doesn't look exactly the same now. They have added, I think, a tower. And there's a statue today right here in the center. And on the other side is City Hall. So this was at the time the Market Square in Quebec City. So we have many interesting details actually in this painting. You can see cholera victims, of course, again, very palish, bluish, being affected. People carting off their dead to the cemeteries or to paupers' graves. You have funeral processions in town. You have doctors leaving with their bags to see patients, priests giving the prayers and blessings to the infected. But there's also another very interesting details in this image. Can anybody see something? Yes?
Is it the fires in?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You see those fire pits all along the streets here, and with black smoke rising from it. So these are actually burning cauldrons of tar. So what they believe, again, we're into this idea that cholera is being spread by miasma. So they believe that by burning tar like this in the street that it would burn the miasma out of the air. So if you were walking in Quebec City in the summer of 1832, this whole city would have smoked like burning tar, and also like you would have heard cannon shots all day long, because the soldiers were firing cannons, because again, burning black powder was believed to, again, burn the miasma out of the air. Obviously, that didn't work as expected, and cholera made many victims around here. Now, the disease quickly travels to Montreal, of course, and then we have this idea that immigrants are responsible for the disease. That this is bringing a lot of tensions, of course, with the new people arriving. And this was actually, we have today, of course, debates around immigration here in Canada. But at the time, you received around 600 to 10,000 new immigrants per week in Quebec alone. So imagine the numbers. Imagine the problems when you don't have a public health system to control this. So the problem quickly went completely out of hand. And you see here in this caricature, of course, which was made much later on, you see the cholera, of course, traveling through an immigrant ship from Britain. And you see the Board of Health here trying to stop it with a battery of disinfectant, of carbolic acid. So this is probably from the 1870s or later, after carbolic acid was introduced as a disinfectant. So it shows the kind of the desperation of the authorities to stop the spread of the disease. Are there any fans of the Tragically Hip here? Yes, okay. So there's actually a very interesting song by the Tragically Hip called Lake Fever. Now, I won't have it played because we don't have so much time, but it actually talks about the arrival of cholera in Kingston in 1832. It's a very good song, unfortunately not very indicative. It talks about lake fever, which was one of the nicknames of cholera back then, but doesn't necessarily talk about that kind of lake fever. It's more of a thing between a girl and a boy. So anyway, there's one I haven't played here, but of course Kingston was affected deeply by cholera. So on June 17, barely 6 days after it was first rumored in Quebec City, the disease was already making its first victim in Kingston. And that's 6 days. That's all it took. So the yellow flag was raised near the harbor, and measures were taken to hopefully stop cholera. So no boats could enter the harbor unless being inspected by a health official. Any master of a ship bringing sick passengers would be severely fined, and carters were ordered to hold themselves to be ready to take any person to the sick hospital, which was built in a warehouse directed by Dr. Evans. So now we have a picture here of KGH. KGH was a project at the time, but because cholera arrived, the plans were actually stopped because they say, okay, we don't have time to build a whole hospital. We need to build quickly a special hospital for cholera. So it slowed down the work considerably. Now, few businesses were kept open. The streets were mostly empty. People were saying, of course, this is actually a merchant from Kingston that said this, nothing is to be heard but the cholera. Now, no, he's not talking about the privates, but he's talking about the news. So everybody was talking about, of course, in town was cholera. And by October, the disease was over, and life began again around November, when the soldiers came out of their fort, and the victims were carted away. So cholera would make actually several comebacks, including in 1834, which was a worse year for Kingston, where over 300 people died, including a large portion of the hospital fund's contributors, which again slowed down the work on KGH. So what were the treatments available around that time for people suffering from cholera? Well, one of the most popular one was called calomel. So calomel is actually mercury chloride. Yes, and it's used, interestingly, as a purgative. So it's probably the most popular at the time, but also probably the worst way to treat cholera, when you think about it. But under the current knowledge at the time, it probably made sense. You know, the body is trying to expel something, an imbalance, so let's help him do so. But probably only hastened the demise of many patients. Also castor oil with laudanum. So oil, castor oil is of course made from castor beans, and again used as a laxative. So that's what it is, but curiously it's mixed with laudanum. And the laudanum is probably the only medicine that made sense here. It's a tincture of opium, which can have the effect of treating diarrhea, perhaps offering a certain respite from the pain of the disease. Also, a very common treatment was, of course, bloodletting. So bloodletting is an old practice, comes from the ancient Greek and Romans, and the idea behind bloodletting is that the body is controlled by 4 humors, and when there's an imbalance, it can lead to disease. So those 4 humors are black and yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. And blood is the only one that doesn't expel itself naturally from the body. So you have to cut your patient open and drain all that bad blood away from the body, so that all this fever can leave the body with it. Of course, didn't really work. It probably only weakened the patients. Now, one very interesting experimental treatment that was offered in Kingston, in one case, 20 people were transfused with salt water. So the effects were very good at first, and it's probably due to the rehydration that took place. But the sick quickly relapsed, and every one of those 20 people died. So other treatments included cupping, mercury ingestion, and a very interesting one as well, tobacco smoke enema. Yes, you've heard that right, tobacco smoke enema. So what's tobacco smoke enema? It was actually believed that tobacco was a stimulant, and that the smoke would stimulate the vital spirits in the body and revive the person. So it was actually used, seriously, to revive victims of drowning. And also, since cholera was centered around the intestines, what it would do is to blow tobacco directly into the intestines, and while the patient was ingesting mercury. And so they believe that it would just move the mercury around the intestines and clean them. So, of course, talk about blowing tobacco up your behind, right? So that's where the expression comes from. Now, in India, of course, that's where the disease comes from. So what were the people in India doing to treat cholera? So most of the medicine prescribed were spices, camphor, essential oils, so external treatments to ease the spasm and restore the heat. Because it was believed that it was, in Indian medicine, it was the body was lacking heat, so you needed the warm baths and friction. Also, you had more aggressive techniques such as ligating limbs for slowing or concentrating circulation to certain areas, or cauterization. Now, you could also be given acidic drinks and rice gruel, which were probably some of the most effective treatment, right? Rehydrating the patient, reacidifying the stomach. Some of the British doctors, actually, what do you think the British doctors thought about Indian medicine at the time? Yeah, they were probably very dismissive, right? Well, actually, no. They were very interested by Indian medicine. Why is that? Because people back in the 1830s were still following the Hippocratic tradition, so the tradition from the Greeks and Romans. And under that tradition, it was believed that the treatment of a disease depends on your geographical location. So you cannot treat cholera the same way in England as you can in India. And why were they thinking this? Because, well, imagine you are a Greek doctor in Athens. You're treating your patient, let's say, for a boil in a certain way, and it works. You think it works. So, but you hear that people in Persia actually using something else, totally different. And some people of very good repute are saying that it works. So you try it, it doesn't work. So you think that, well, probably what's happening is that disease treatment depends on geographical location. So something that works in Persia won't work in Greece. And that's what people were doing, and they were very interested. So I'll just read you here an excerpt from a journal of somebody that witnessed an Indian, very interesting Indian treatment for cholera. So, H. Scouten passed on a story from the earlier 19th century French surgeon Gravier of the cure of a cholera sufferer in Pondicherry. A paste of lemon juice, alum, and iron oxide was rubbed over the man's eyes. The pain it produced vexed and enraged the sick man, and he attempted to strike those around him. The vomiting became more frequent, and his attendants fled to avoid his blows. He pursued them, passing by a reservoir of water which served for the purpose of the garden. He plunged into it and drank with avidity for several moments. They surrounded him, but he remained tranquil in the water. The enormous quantity of liquid he drank was followed by fainting. He was then removed from the reservoir and put to bed. He slept for 11 hours. When he awoke, the vomiting and dejection had ceased, but he was blind. So, this fact is known by all the inhabitants of Pondicherry. So, what had happened here, and nobody really understood how the man got cured. Was it the lemon paste in his eyes, or was it the water? But they started to understand the need for rehydration, so which was actually what was working, and not what made the man blind. Respect for indigenous healing was such that in setting up a training program for Indian practitioners in the 1820s, the Bengal administrators developed a curriculum based on both ancient Sanskrit and European authors and techniques. And soldiers were given a flannel belt in India, a flannel cholera belt, so to heat up and constrict the stomach. Now, cholera did not only produce physical ailments, but also political turmoil. So the terror and misery caused by the disease was bringing many social upheavals. The problem was due in good parts by how authorities were reacting to cholera. So they were setting up cordons sanitaires, they were doing isolation, paupers' graves. It all exasperated the public's frustration and fears. It's linked to many revolts actually in Europe, including the French Revolution of 1848, and in Canada, to the Rebellion of 1837. In Quebec, some were suspecting that the British government officials were sending their sickly and enfeebled to Lower Canada on purpose. They're doing this to kill us. So, and William Lyon Mackenzie in Toronto was enraged when he heard that the British House of Lords believed that the cholera epidemic in Canada was a scam in order to get funds from them. It would, of course, go and lead to the rebellion in Upper Canada in 1837. So the medical field also suffered from this. Their helplessness in facing the pandemic and the sad state of the new hospitals that were being built but filled with cholera victims gave them a bad reputation. It was a place where you went to die, and the doctors could do very little for you. And that would stay on for decades. So some also suspected the medical professional of being part of the conspiracy to eliminate some of the undesirables from society. And the disease was, of course, worse with the working class, and many associate poverty and sin with cholera. But they were nearing, actually, a breakthrough. So what does this political situation remind you of in recent, maybe last year's news? Does it remind you of something that happened? About Ebola, right? What was happening in Africa at the time was that a lot of people were believing that the government, there was some kind of conspiracy to kill people with Ebola, and they would be very wary of the hospitals that were set around, and they would flee the current quarantine zones. So of course, you can put all the measures you want, but if you don't convince the people, it's very hard to implement them. As I was saying, we were nearing a medical breakthrough. And now I'm going to show you quickly a very interesting video about this. If I can get it open. All right, so this is taken from a very good series. Actually, I recommend you if you haven't seen it. It's made by CBC. It's called The 7 Wonders of the Industrial World. This episode is called Sewer King. So it's about a man who developed the first modern sewers in London. And it also talks a lot about cholera. And we'll see what they have to say about this epidemic. There are Arabic subtitles. I don't know why, but if you can read Arabic, good for you. Let me get the sound up.
Now I fear for my own children. Cholera is ruthless and random. There are children dying needlessly throughout this great city. Cleansing London is the most pressing concern of the day, yet still, Parliament will grant us neither the money nor the power to accomplish the job.
Before the epidemic ended in the winter of 1849, more than 14,000 Londoners had died. And still, no one understood the disease. No one knew what caused it, or how to stop it spreading, should it return.
What is cholera? Is it a fungus, an insect, a miasma, an electrical disturbance, a deficiency of ozone, a morbid off-scouring of the intestinal canal? We know nothing. We are at sea, in a whirlpool of conjecture.
Cholera had defeated the finest minds of Victorian medicine. But in Soho, one doctor was gathering evidence for a new theory on the cause of the disease. John Snow, pioneer in the fields of anesthetics and epidemiology, a man ahead of his time.
A drunkard.
Snow was the first to doubt the miasma theory.
The proliferation of disease is generally ascribed to noxious exhalations. But how can that be when its distribution is so uneven? During the recent epidemic, the dwellings on this side of the street suffered fearful devastation, whereas in the dwellings on the other side there was but one fatal case. Yet their occupants breathed the same air. Surely, if cholera was caused by miasma, both sides would be equally affected. Is that not curious?
Working just one street apart, Snow and Bazalgette would spend years grappling with the same problem from two different points of view. Yet, ironically, they never met. 1853, the disease returned.
The mortality in this limited area probably equals any in the country. More people have died here in the past few weeks than during the plague.
From the start of the new outbreak, Snow had been meticulously plotting the spread of the disease.
The distribution is remarkable. Houses marked in black have suffered cholera deaths. The outbreak is concentrated here in Broad Street, in the vicinity of a pump, which enjoys a high reputation for the taste and purity of its water. There are 11 other pumps in the district, yet around those there is virtually no cholera. An army officer from St. John's Wood dined in Soho, drank water from the pump and was dead within hours. The coffee shop owner supplied her customers with the same water at dinner time. 9 died the next day. The percussion cap factory in Broad Street supplies its workers with the pump water. So far, 18 of them are dead. Yet, the brewery almost next door, where the workers drink only beer, has suffered no deaths at all. But most convincing of all is the case of a widow and her niece who hailed from Hampstead, a high and healthy part of the city. When both ladies succumbed to cholera at the beginning of the outbreak, I was at a loss to explain why, until I interviewed the widow's son, who informed me that his mother once lived in Soho, where she developed such a taste for the Broad Street water that she had a bottle sent up every day by carrier's cart. Both ladies drank the bottle on Thursday and were dead by Saturday. Ergo, cholera cannot be caused by miasma, atmospheric effluvia, or bad air. This proves without a doubt that it is spread in the water supply. Cholera is a water-borne disease.
But Snow's theory that cholera was spread by drinking water was too rapid.
So we can see here, we have a very important, man in the history of this disease, Dr. John Snow. So Dr. Snow, basically, his theory was, as they were saying, dismissed, in part because it did not completely invalidated the miasma theory, that people believe that water was just another vessel for the miasma. So, but also because Snow himself couldn't explain where the contamination came from. Now it's important to consider that Snow was only partially right. He also had no idea that bacteria existed, of course, and surely did not believe that they were causing cholera. But this idea of water being the vessel was very groundbreaking. And it was finally explained by one of his detractors, actually. So a Reverend Henry Whitehead wanted to prove that cholera was really a divine punishment. So he would say, well, you know, if we cannot find a source for this disease in this well, surely it's God who put cholera in that well. So he used Snow's case to make his point, but by examining the facts, he was convinced that Snow's idea was good, actually, and he pinpointed the contamination to the presence of a cesspool into which a woman had dumped the water in which cleaned her baby's diaper every day, and this water infiltrated the well and began one of the worst epidemics in England. So the authorities themselves were convinced around 1866. So you see here, this is one of the first public signs telling about how to prevent cholera. It's very interesting. So you have to, of course, be washed, because being dirty actually propagates miasma. Every room has to be cleaned and swept, washed. Let no rubbish or dirt lie about the door nor near the house. Let off all stagnant water. Let the house be whitewashed with hot lime, and beware of drunkenness. Nothing is so likely to bring on the disease. So if everybody is seized with sickness, purging the stomach, and a feeling of cold all over, is probably cholera. And now we see how those signs actually change as people understood the disease. So here, well, abstain from cold water when heated, and above all from ardent spirits. So again, drinking, it's not good. That's where cholera comes from. But also avoid raw vegetables and unripe fruit, and interestingly, above all, abstain from ardent spirits, and if the habit does render them indispensable, take much less than usual. But by 1866, the theory of Dr. Snow was unfortunately passed away at that time, was finally accepted by the authorities. And you have Dr. William Farr, who recognizes the same pattern and issues new directive. So you see here that he's saying not to drink any water which has not been previously boiled. So finally, we get to a better understanding of this disease propagation. But it's only, so of course people realize that the water is the problem. That there's all these critters living inside your water. You see the monster soup, commonly called Thames water. And that, again, it heightens the idea of conspiracy, that the authorities are, again, poisoning those public drinking sources with cholera. So it's only by then that people start realizing that we need a good public health system to take care of used water. So all over the world, starting in London and then also here in Kingston, more modern sewers are being built, and more modern purifying techniques are being pioneered to take care of all the water that's infecting people with cholera. So this is one example of a sewer in the Victorian era. And of course we go in with Louis Pasteur. You probably heard the name before. So Louis Pasteur was a French chemist, and he demonstrated the principles of fermentation through the action of bacteria, which were not created, as was believed by then, by spontaneous generation. So people knew that there were bacteria, but they didn't understand where it came from. So there was these ideas that certain that life actually came from unlife. That certain animals such as maggots or tapeworms were created by their hosts, or that life, just like fleas, could be created by dirt or by dust around the floors. But Louis Pasteur successfully demonstrated that it was actually biogenesis, that the idea that all life comes from life, that you need something to propagate those bacteria into you. So the idea was published in 1858 and was met with a strong resistance, in part because Pasteur was an outsider to the medical field. But his work was finally widely accepted by the 1880s and led to more research. In turn, Robert Koch is widely accredited with the discovery of the Vibrio cholerae, so the bacteria responsible for the disease. But in fact, it's another man, Filippo Pacini, 30 years earlier, made a discovery, 1854, but Pacini did not publish. So, as they say, publish or perish. So in this case, it was true for many people. So because it was a bit too much ahead of its time, as well as bacterial infection was not at all an accepted concept, as I've just said. Now, the treatment today for cholera is mostly rehydration. And it's in during World War II that a U.S. Navy physician named Robert Allen Phillips came up with a rehydration protocol, which pioneered to rehydrate victims of cholera. And this protocol is still a basis for what people use today and saved a great amount of lives. Also, the advancement of more reliable treatments such as antibiotics, of course, improve greatly the survival rates of victims. So one of the problems of cholera treatment is that people don't understand how fast it goes, how fast you lose water, and how much you need to take. So usually they say that you need to take 10% of your own body weight in water in the first 2 to 3 hours. Imagine this. Potassium can also be given as an additive. Treatment continues until diarrhea stops, until the disease has run its course. So using, as I was saying, antibiotics reduces the need for water and time, and with good treatment, the mortality is around 1%. Without good treatment, about 50 to 60% succumb to it. So there's been about 7 great pandemics in our history. As you see, some of them are very close again to different conflicts. So of course, Napoleonic Wars, the Crimean War, and even during World War I, some people were afflicted with cholera, even though it was much better understood. And the most recent pandemic was in the 1960s and 70s in Asia. Now, could this happen again? Is our public health system strong enough? Well, yes, we have a very good system here. So there's not too much need to be frightened, but as we know from recent news, Flint, you've probably heard of the case, where sometimes this system can fail dramatically. So of course, it's always good to be vigilant to avoid these diseases from coming back into our lives. So I think that's about all the time we had. I hope you liked this presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I also brought an object from our collection which could have been used to treat cholera. So this is a kit for bloodletting and also medical cupping. So if you want to see it later on, I can show it to you. So you can see what it looks like. So anyway, thank you very much.